Hello everybody, and welcome back to Book 3 of the Royal Ranger series, Duel at Araluen. I'm here with Chapter 31, and we're going to go ahead and get into it. "Sir Horace," said the leader of the cavalry troop, "there's someone waving from the south tower balcony." Horace looked up to the tower. Sure enough, someone was waving a towel, or a pillow slip, from the balcony that ran around it. He thought it might be Cassandra, but couldn't be sure. He stood in his stirrups, drew his sword, and held it over his head. Then he twisted the blade back and forth to catch the sun, creating a series of flashes to acknowledge that he had seen the signal. "I imagine they'll move down the stairs once we start through the gate," he said. Then, satisfied that the signaler on the balcony had seen his reply, he resheathed his sword and settled back in the saddle. Gillen moved Blaze up beside Horace's battle horse. The ranger had been off to the left, watching the hill below them. "I thought I saw men moving up the hill toward that grove of trees Mattie pointed out," he said quietly. Horace nodded. "So she's in position. How long did she say it would take them to get through the tunnel?" He knew the answer, but he was reviewing the timing for the coming events in his mind. 10 to 15 minutes, Gillen told him. Horace chewed his lip thoughtfully and glanced at the sun, sinking lower in the western sky. Already, the shadows of the trees on that side were stretching across the grassy hillside toward them. He estimated that there were 2 hours of daylight left. More than enough time to get the job done, he thought. He gestured to the cavalry leader. "We'll start to move forward. Archers," he added, turning in his saddle to address the men on foot. "Keep an eye on the battlements. They've got crossbows up there. Anyone looks like shooting at us, pick them off immediately." There was a low growl of assent from the bowmen. Horace glanced left and right, making sure his men were ready, raised his hand, then lowered it forward. The mixed force moved together, with the jingle of harness and equipment. On his right, the Scandians from Wolfbiter stepped out as well. They were in no fixed formation. They strode toward the castle with their weapons in their hands and their shields ready. They had gone 15 meters when a crossbow bolt whizzed past Horace, missing him by several meters. Instantly, he heard the rapid slapping sound of several bows releasing, and the whimper of arrows fleeting toward the walls. A moment later, there was a cry of pain, and he saw a man fall back from the battlements, his crossbow dropping from his hands and falling to the moat far below. Another bow released, and a second crossbowman dropped back into cover just in time. Inadvertently, as he jerked back, he hit the release trigger on his crossbow, and his shot arced high and wide of the approaching men. Horace saw Gillen riding with an arrow knocked to his massive longbow. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the battlements. Horace looked to see if Damone were visible, but the Red Fox leader was staying out of sight. With an archer of Gillen's expertise seeking him out, it was a wise decision, Horace thought. "Far enough," he said, raising his hand in the signal to halt. They were close enough now to waste no time when the drawbridge came down. "Shields up," he added, and heard the clatter as the troopers brought their shields around to their front to protect them from further crossbow bolts. The archers had no shields, but they moved quickly to take a position behind the halted cavalry, where the armored men and horses would protect them from shooters on the walls, while still enabling them to shoot in return. "Don't forget your own shield," Gillen said quietly beside him. Horace belatedly let his buckler slip around to the front. He glanced at his companion. "What about you?" Gillen shrugged. I'll stay behind you and that massive beast you're sitting on." Horace gave him a pained look. "That's no way to talk about a thoroughbred battle horse." Gillen sniffed disdainfully. "Thoroughbred ox, more like it," he said. Stamper and Blaze didn't seem to share their rider's sniping. The two horses whinnied at each other in a companionable way. Behind them, two archers released another pair of arrows at figures on the battlements. There was a further cry of pain. "Your men are doing well," Horace remarked. Gillen glanced back at them before replying. "They were the pick of the bunch," he said. "They're all expert shots." He was still speaking when he suddenly raised his bow, drew, and released. The arrow hissed away, and 5 seconds later, there was another yell of pain from the defenders on the wall. Horace grinned at him. "You're not so bad yourself." "Just keeping them up to the mark," Gillen said. He fidgeted with his reins for a few seconds, then glanced down the hill to the copse of trees. "Wonder what's keeping Maddie," he said. "She should be through the tunnel by now." "Be patient," Horace told him. "Nothing ever goes to time in a battle." "Be nice if it did, just this once," Gillen grumbled in reply. In the south tower, Cassandra's men had opened the door to the stairs and moved down to the 8th level. Seeing none of Damon's men present, they replaced the section of stairs they had removed when they first sought shelter in the tower. Now, fully armed, they stood ready to make their way down to the lower levels. On the 9th floor, Cassandra called to Ingrid, who was keeping watch from the terrace. "Any sign, Ingrid?" "No, my lady," the girl replied. "Sir Horace and his men have moved closer to the gate, but there's no sign of Maddie and her Scandians yet." "Don't get edgy," Duncan told Cassandra. "Nothing ever goes to time in a battle." Unknowingly, he repeated Horace's phrase to Gillen. Cassandra looked at him, noting the long sword in his hand. "Where do you think you're going?" "I'm coming with you," he said. The tone in his voice brooked no argument, so she decided not to waste any time with it, but to accept the inevitable. "All right," she said, "but stay back behind the men. You're not fully fit yet." Duncan nodded agreement. He wanted to be in at the end of this battle, but he realized he couldn't play an active part. He was realist enough to know that, if he did, he could well be putting his own men at risk as they protected him. He'd have to be content to observe, and to advise Cassandra if necessary. They started down the winding stairs. Cassandra placed 3 of her troopers in the lead, armed with long spears. 3 archers followed them. Then Ingrid, with 4 troopers ranged around them. The remainder of her men followed, also in threes, with Duncan in the center, screened by a wall of bodies and armor. "Take it slowly," she cautioned the men in the lead. "We don't want any unpleasant surprises." She glanced quickly at Thomas, who was in the lead rank of archers. "We'll stop at the 6th floor, unless we run into any resistance. I can check the main gate from there." Thomas nodded. They had to tread in a fine line. They needed to be ready to join in the fight as soon as the drawbridge was down, leaving the stairway at the 4th level and moving across to the keep. But if they moved too early, they could be isolated by Damon's men. A few floors later, Thomas called a quiet command to the leading 3 troops. They stopped in place, their shields up and their spears ready. There was no sign of any opposition. He turned to Cassandra and jerked his thumb at the door beside them. "We're at the 6th floor, my lady," he said. Cassandra licked her lips nervously and moved toward the door, turning the iron loop that activated the latch. The door was unbarred, and the latch lifted easily. She pushed the door open a meter or so, and peered around. There was nobody visible. A corridor led away to left and right, with doors visible on either side. This floor was used for accommodation, she knew. These doors would lead to bedrooms, and they would have windows overlooking the courtyard and the main gate. Quietly, she drew her katana with a muted shring of steel on wood and leather. She opened the door farther and stepped into the corridor. "Wait, my lady," Thomas said. He gestured for a trooper to go with her, and followed her himself. The three of them crossed quietly to the nearest door. Holding her sword ready, Cassandra reached for the door handle and turned it. This door was unlocked as well. The well-oiled latch lifted, and the door swung into the room. Cassandra stepped quickly through the doorway, sword pointing left and right, ready for danger. There was nobody present, and she moved farther in, making room for her two guards to join her. Assuring herself that there was nobody lurking in ambush in the corners or behind the floor-length drapes, she walked quickly to the window and heaved the heavy curtains open. From this lower level, Horace and his men were hidden from her sight by the walls, but she could see through the courtyard gateway that the drawbridge was still up, and no attack had begun so far. Damon's men lined the battlements, all peering outward at the attacking force, but there was no outcry, no sound of weapons clashing against one another. She turned to Thomas. "We'll wait on this floor until the fighting starts," she said. "Then we'll go down those stairs and join in. Tell the men that Damon is mine. Nobody else is to touch him." Thomas regarded her curiously for several seconds. She was small and slim, although he knew she was well-muscled and skilled in the use of the katana. He decided that he wouldn't like to be in Damon's shoes when she caught up with him. "I'll spread the word," he said. And that'll be the end of chapter number 31. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening. And as always, I'll hope to see you next time in chapter 32. God bless, and have a good one.